According to this canon, when a multi-worded name of a person, an institution, a conference, and an organization of government or institution or conference, and in the multi-worded title of a document other than periodical publication, the entry word or the entry word group in the heading of the main entry should be the one with the highest recall value. The term recall value refers to the quality of being called back to memory. Therefore, the canon directs that the entry element to be chosen should be the one having highest probability of being called back to memory by the majority of the readers. The canon is applicable for the rendering of names of entities in the heading of an entry. The canon deals with rendering of pure names of persons, corporate bodies, and titles of documents. Comments. In CCC, canon of recall value has been applied in many headings. The code treats family names of Western and Westernized names as entry elements. Recall value is concentrated in such names. Example, Shakespeare, Ranganathan, in bracket Shiyali Ramamrita, Radhakrishnan, in bracket Sarvepalli, Chakrabarti, in bracket ML. According to CCC, the entry element in the name of an administrative department of a government is to be the word or word group denoting the sphere of work. Example, Punjab, Agriculture, in bracket Department of, Kerala, Library Science, in bracket Department of. The entry element of the name of a temporary organ of a government is to be rendered according to its subdivision for the administrative department. Example, India, Education, in bracket Commission, 1964. Canon of recall value. This canon takes into consideration the memory of the users regarding the search of catalogue. This canon is revolutionary from the angle of Ranganathan's thought. Now let us summarize the session. In this unit, it is tried to explain the 9 canons of cataloguing formulated by Ranganathan and the application of these canons at the time of cataloguing of the documents in a library. Canons of cataloguing are all implications of the laws of library science, specific to the field of cataloguing. In case of a conflict between canons, an appeal is made to the laws of library science. Each canon has a specific sphere of its application. Canon of ascertainability, canon of consistence, canon of sort heading, and canon of context are applicable to all kinds of headings. Canon of permanence is applicable to personal name and corporate body headings. Similarly, canon of currency is confined to subject headings. The canon of recall value is an extremely important one. This canon may be considered a master one as a number of canons are its corollaries. It will have a profound effect on cataloguing. Here are some assignments for you to work out. Prepare the heading for the library catalogue of the given documents following the canon of perpotence. Scientific monograph series of American Chemical Society. Second one, prepare the headings for the library catalogue of the given documents following the canon of individualization. A. History of College Square in Calcutta. B. History of College Square in Chennai. Third one, prepare the headings for the library catalogue of the given documents following the canon of individualization. A. Author Krishna Chakrabarti, year of birth 1970. B. Author Byron Das Gupta, year of birth 1986. Fourth one, prepare the heading for the library catalogue of the given document following the canon of recall value. Books written by Department of Agriculture, Punjab, India. Fifth one, prepare the heading for the library catalogue of the given document following the canon of recall value, conference proceedings of All Asia Educational Conference held in Varanasi in 1930. Now I can suggest few books for further reference. Classified Catalogue Code with Additional Rules for Dictionary Catalogue Code, 5th edition, written by Ranganathan S.R., 1964, published by Asia Publishing House, Bombay. Theory of Cataloging, 5th revised edition, written by Kumar Girja and Kumar Krishna, 1991, published by Vikas Publishing House Private Limited, Delhi. Recall value and entry word in heading, library science with a slant to documentation, 6, written by Ranganath S.R., 1969. The canon of recall value and the arrangement of main entries in documentation list, IASLIC Bulletin, page 18 and 81, written by Bhattacharya G, 1973. Variation between personal name headings and title page usage, Cataloging and Classification Quarterly Journal, page 1 to 11, written by Shore Melinda L, 1984. Thank you for watching this session. See you next time with a new topic. Until then, bye.
Welcome to the interface program. Today we have Professor Ajit Kembavi as our guest. He is a world-renowned astrophysicist. He has been involved with many mega projects in astronomy. And welcome, Ajit.
Nice to talk to you today.
Yeah.
I'm very glad to be on the interface program.
So, will you be able to elaborate a little bit about the mega projects that?
Yes. We have been hearing a lot about mega projects in astronomy in India. So first we'll see what are the mega projects. As you know, astronomers are very fond of building bigger and bigger telescopes. So the idea is that a bigger telescope, you can see much further in the universe, which should also mean that because of the time taken by light to travel the great distance, it means that you are looking at the universe in the past. So when we observe distant objects, we not only see how the universe is now, but we also see how the universe was millions, hundreds of millions and even billions of years ago.
So, what is the biggest telescope now we have in in India? Or what
yes,
is the
what happens, let me just complete what I said, was that because of this need to build bigger telescopes, the programs are getting bigger and bigger, the telescopes are getting more and more expensive, and they require a very great deal of technology, which should mean that many people in many countries have got to cooperate together, and the cost becomes very high. So a project like that, where you spend hundreds of millions of dollars, or in our language many thousands of crores, and where there is a lot of people involved, and where the time scale is long, okay, which means that it will take you 10 years to build the telescope and then you'll use it for the next 20 years or so. Okay. That is typically what is called a mega project in astronomy.
Okay. So coming back to the telescopes, what is the status that India has now in terms of the size of telescopes, for example?
Yes. Now that is a very interesting question, because the answer can become very complex. Because first of all, I should ask you, what do you mean by a telescope? Because the traditional view of the astronomer is that he builds a telescope, optical telescope, and looks at the stars through the lens and sees the stars. Now, that view is no longer tenable for two different reasons. One, even optical telescopes are very large. They are reflecting telescopes, which means that you use a mirror rather than lenses. And then, because of their size and their excessive complication, you need computers to drive the telescope. Number one. Number two is that the electromagnetic wavelength region that astronomers used to observe is very wide. So it would mean that there can be radio telescopes. A radio telescope is just like the antenna that you have on top of your house to detect signals from satellites for your TV, except that they can get much bigger, and they can be tens of dishes which act together. Or you can have a X-ray telescope. X-rays don't penetrate the Earth's atmosphere and reaches from distant sources, and therefore X-ray telescopes are always put on satellites. So depending on which part of the spectrum you want to observe, there will be different telescopes. In modern astronomy, we always take a multi-wavelength approach, which would mean that we use many different kinds of telescope to observe the same object and get a spectrum.
Okay, because when you said this multi-wavelength observation, our satellite, the first astronomical satellite, AstroSat, is known for its capabilities now. According to you, how is it going to help the astronomy community here, or what are the advantages of having a telescope like that in space?
That is a very interesting question that you ask as soon as I mentioned multi-wavelength observations, because AstroSat is a very fine example of this approach. Traditionally what happened was that people had, let's say, X-ray telescopes on one satellite. So let us say that they observe very interesting X-ray source, but they want to observe it at other wavelengths. They would have to depend upon other telescopes. Now that kind of organization is very difficult to bring about quickly, which would mean that if I observe a cosmic source in X-rays at one time, by the time I went and observed it in the radio or in the optical, it would be several days later, which would make it unusable. The data then is not the best possible. AstroSat is the first Indian satellite fully dedicated to astronomy. It was launched on September 28 last year. It has been in the making for a long time. Now, AstroSat is a very important addition to the world of astronomy, because first of all it is a multi-wavelength satellite, which means that it has got 4 telescopes, each of a different kind, on it, which all point in the same direction. There is a 5th sky monitor which is perpendicular to them, but these 4 observing telescopes are they're pointing in the same direction, which means that a given source can at once be observed in the optical, in the ultraviolet, in the soft X-rays, in the hard X-rays and very hard X-rays. So that makes it a very unique satellite. There have been no satellite so far anywhere in the world with such a capability. Second, AstroSat has also large detectors, which means that you can observe sources very quickly, which means that one can follow the time variation of these sources very fast.
So, just like you were mentioning in your talk, the 30-meter telescope is also another big project that India is getting involved into. So, will you be able to elaborate a little bit?
Yes, I can tell you about 30-meter telescope, but let me first tell you about what is the kind of observing facility we have in India and abroad. Now, we have several telescopes in India of the 2-meter class, optical telescopes. So, one telescope is belongs to Ayuka, my institute, and which is near Narayangaon, the telescope, and then there is other telescope belonging to the Indian Institute of Astrophysics, which is in the Himalayas in Hanle, and then a 3.6 meter telescope, which would be the biggest, one of the biggest telescopes in Asia, is about to see first light in the Himalayas. It belongs to Aries. But then these by present day standards are counted as relatively small optical telescope. So what is a big telescope? I can mention 2 telescopes to you. One is actually a pair of telescopes, the Keck telescopes, which are located in Hawaii. They belong to Caltech and University of California system. Each telescope is 10 meters in diameter. I mean, which makes it the biggest telescope in the world. There is another large telescope with which we Indian universities and IUCA have an association, and which is called SALT, which stands for Southern African Large Telescope, which is 400 kilometers away from Cape Town in a very, very remote region. Okay. So these now count as the biggest optical telescopes. So that you mentioned 30-meter telescope. You see, the 30-meter telescope has the number that you use. When I say 2 meter or when I say 20 meter or 30 meter, that always refers to the diameter of the mirror. Now here is another interesting fact which comes about. Typically the lenses and mirrors which are associated with telescopes so far have been circular. Because why circular? Because they are easy to make. But as telescope mirrors became bigger, it became impossible to make a monolithic mirror of 10 meters, let alone 30 meters. And even if you make the mirror in your factory, how will you carry it? Hardly any road anywhere in the world will allow you to carry a 10-meter object up the mountain. Now astronomers make segmented telescopes, okay, which means that you construct the mirror out of much smaller hexagonal segments. You stick them together. So which means that the whole mirror, the large mirror, has got the shape of a hexagon. So the 30-meter telescope is built like that, and if you go from one corner of the hexagon to another corner of the hexagon, it will be opposite corner, it will be 30 meters. What is important is not the diameter of the telescope, diameter of the mirror, but the area of the mirror. So now I got a 10-meter mirror, then I got a 30-meter mirror, the new one, which would mean that the area, the diameter is 3 times bigger, which would mean that the area is 9 times bigger. Right? So which means that the capacity of that telescope to observe is 100 times, 10 times better than the existing telescopes.
Yes. So the complexity just not depend on the size, and it increases in every manifold, right? Because the moment we put different number of segments, the arrangement and their accuracy that we have to achieve all becomes really complex.
So you see, again, that is a very important consideration that you raise, because just imagine how big is a 30-meter telescope, and 30 meter is a football size thing, and then you go there, and so now that telescope is not static. Okay, it is that mirror has to be made part of a machinery so that you can point it to any direction in the sky, and you want very, very accurate pointing. The surface of the telescope again has to be extremely accurately defined. So what happens is that even if you take a telescope with a single mirror, as you point in different directions, the gravitational forces on it, the stresses act differently, which actually bends the mirror slightly, distorting image. But now the modern telescopes are segmented, meaning that, as I explained to you already, you are taking small segments and then you are arranging them together into one large mirror, which means they can go out of shape. So you require a technology which is known as active optics, meaning that there are sensors on the mirrors which can all the time sense, once every second or quicker, they sense the relative positions of the mirrors, and then there are assemblies behind the mirror which allow you to move the mirrors slightly up and down. The mirrors can be moved in 3 directions so that you have the perfect alignment. Now aligning the mirror is just one thing. Now the instruments, because the telescope is only an agent, the telescope, it actually funnels light onto the mirror and onto your instrument. But then what you need to do is to have a detector. In the old days, the detector was the human eye. About 150 years ago, people started using photographic plates. But now these are electronic detectors. I mean, these are CCD detectors, okay, so with which everybody is familiar now because they are the cameras and so forth. So what happens is that you use these kind of instruments, but the larger the telescope, the larger is the instrument. So for the 30-meter telescope, each instrument is of the size of a large hall, you can say.
Yeah.
And therefore, controlling all these instruments, putting them together, controlling the telescope, it becomes a gigantic information technology problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the TMT, for example, because India is a very important contributor to the software development for the TMT, which is for the control of the telescope as well as all other tasks, and it is going to take 10 years to write that software.
Yeah.
Okay, so therefore the telescope is a very, very complex machinery, and to keep it going flawlessly is incredibly difficult.
Type of technology that we need is really vast now.
It's vast, and you can say that much of the technology that you use will actually be frontier technology. Okay, because you see, the point is that we are building the biggest telescope in the world of its kind. So, which would mean that the technology is something which has not been tested before. Okay, because this telescope is bigger than anything that you have, and you know, scaling is not always very easy, because if I make a model toy plane and I make it very cleverly and I can get it to fly, then it does not mean that I can just multiply everything by 100 and make a passenger plane, because when I make the telescope, the plane bigger, then I have to consider completely different aerodynamics. Okay, so similarly, when I make a bigger and bigger instrument, there will be unknown effects which come into the picture. But that is a challenge which drives all the scientists and all the technologists, because what we understand is that unless there was something new to be discovered, then people would not be interested.
Professor Kempavi, can you please say about our ventures or our efforts into these international things in, say, in the TMT?
See, as I told you, the TMT is the international collaboration. It was started by the Americans in Caltech and University of California, and it is supported by the Moore Foundation. And it is interesting that this Moore is the same one who gave Moore's law, with all the people in computer science are familiar with. So he gave a lot of money for it. And then later Canada and Japan, China and India have joined. So India is a partner at the 10% level. So what it means is that we contribute 10% of the total cost of the telescope for building it and then for maintaining it. But this is not a case where we send all the money abroad and they use it in whatever way they like. Much of what we are contributing goes as a material contribution. Okay, which means that we will design the software, we make some of the instruments, we polish some of the mirrors, and there are several such activities that we carry out, which gives us wonderful experience. So we should mean that at the end of the program, when the telescope is ready, Indian astronomers and engineers will be capable of building their own large telescope.
Okay, even larger ones.
Telescopes. Now, how do we do it in India? This is the national effort. There are three institutes: the Indian Institute of Astrophysics in Bangalore, and Ayuka in Pune, and Emmrc in Nainital. These are the three principal partners. The coordination center will be in Bangalore at the IIA. But then there are so many other institutes and organizations and also universities which are helping with it. So once the telescope is built, then there will be a national committee which will call for applications for time, and then that telescope, the time allocation committee, will actually take into account the merit of the proposals which have been made and allocate time. So, and then the data which is obtained will be with the proposer for 2 years, after which it will be made public. Okay, which would mean that all the good things which come from the telescope will be easily accessible by any person in India who wants to use that data, and it will be fully available nationally.
Then coming back to you were involved with the virtual observatory program in India and in the international arena also. So can you please tell about
So what is the virtual observatory?
Yes.
I had talked at length about what is the telescope, and so an observatory is an organization and a setup which has got the telescope and all the other equipment which is required to use it, to maintain it, and many observatories have more than one telescope, or what I would call a hardware observatory, meaning that you will actually go there at the top of a mountain usually, and then you will see all these telescopes there. But for the last dozen years, we have had a concept which is called the virtual observatory, and or the VO, and the virtual observatory provides the same facility that an observatory does, except that it does not, you cannot take new data with it. But as I already said, all data which is obtained through important telescopes is archived. Okay, and then it is generally made available freely to all astronomers in the world. So the virtual observatory allows you to develop standards to be able to use the data. It allows many applications so that you can, these are vast quantities of data, hundreds of terabytes. So you are enabled to actually manage the data and to use it and to analyze it. So it is very interesting. But there have been cases where people sitting in some, let us say, rural parts of Kerala, or deep in Assam or Arunachal Pradesh. From normally communication is difficult, for them to come to Ayuka is difficult, but because of the internet, which is now universally available, they can use the internet to access virtual observatory facilities. Meaning, what do I mean by that? I can say that, look, here is a list of 10 astronomical sources. Can you give me all optical data that is available for them? You can put this query in, it is in a technical language which is very easy to learn, mostly web based, and quite soon, meaning that depending upon how much is the data, within seconds, or sometimes if the data is very voluminous, within hours, you will get the data. You will not only get the data, you will also have all the tools to analyze it. So which means that this empowers everybody. It is a wonderful concept.
Even observing the sky without a telescope at all.
Yes, but you must not. If there were no telescopes, there will be no virtual observatory. Because you observe, you get the data, you put it together, and so because you see the important thing about a given data is that it is not there for single use. Okay, meaning that just think of a cup of tea. A cup of tea is a single use thing. Okay, because I drink it and it is gone. Alright, so whereas data is not single use, because you may want to use the data for some purpose. I can use the very same data for a different purpose. Okay, so that is the idea behind a virtual observatory.
Okay. So this in radio also we are getting into a new project, the kilometer array. SCA.
Yeah.
So what is our role in that?
Yes. You see, the radio astronomers cannot use a single telescope. That is because the wavelength of radio waves is very large, and which should make a good radio telescope prohibitively large in size. So radio astronomers have solved that problem by breaking up, instead of taking many small telescopes and using them in phase. It's a very complex technology, so that they can have the same action as having one large telescope. Now there is a GMRT which was built by Professor Govind Swarup of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. It is now managed by the National Center for Radio Astrophysics in Pune. So GMRT is one of the world's biggest telescopes of radio telescopes of its kind. So just like the TMT will be bigger than everything else when it is built, apart from the ELT, so there's a new radio telescope being built which is called the SKA, Square Kilometer Array, because the total collecting area will be equivalent to 1 square kilometer. And this telescope is being built in two parts. One part will be in South Africa and the other part will be in Australia. So why these two countries? Because they have sufficient remote regions. In India it is very difficult to get a remote location, because even though our country is very large, there's a population, there's a growing population, and there is economic growth, okay, which means that it's very difficult to get empty areas. So now the SKA will have a very large number of antennae. It will be a very large telescope, and India is again an important partner of this project, and the activity is coordinated by NCRA in Pune, and we are there. The NCRA is also building the telescope control system for the telescope. This will be ready partially in 2020 when you can start using it, and 2024 I believe is the target date for a certain level of completion.
Okay. Another interesting area where India is now getting into is the gravitational wave detection.
Yes.
So what are the chances of getting such a facility in India now?
If you ask me what are the chances of detecting gravitational waves, I can give you the answer, but if you ask me what is the chance of the project being approved, I cannot, because it has been with the government for a long time. But it is very interesting that the primary idea due to Albert Einstein, the general theory of relativity on which all this is based, celebrated 100 years. It became 100 years old just last November. So Einstein gave this very revolutionary theory. Everybody has heard of Albert Einstein, everybody has heard of his theories, the theory of relativity, and there he said that gravitation manifests itself through changes in the space-time structure. And one consequence of his theory was that gravitational waves should exist. So what do you mean by that? You see that electromagnetism electric and magnetic fields acting together are described by what are called Maxwell's equations, which are the mathematical, which constitute the mathematical theory of electromagnetism. A consequence of Maxwell's equations is that electromagnetic waves exist, and electromagnetic waves are very, very important. For example, right now you and I are talking together through the medium of electromagnetic waves, because we are using microphones, we are using amplifiers, and our talk is being recorded. Okay, so just as electromagnetic waves exist, it is believed that gravitational waves also exist, except that they are extremely weak. They are so weak that if I take two electrons and I consider electrons, as you know, are charged particles, so there is a Coulomb force between them. That Coulomb force is roughly 10 to the 40 times the gravitational force, so which tells you how immensely weak gravitation is. So how do you generate electromagnetic waves? Okay, you generate electromagnetic waves by taking an antenna and putting up. Like if you look at the local Vivid Bharati station, it will have an antenna, and then the program and electromagnetic signal is sent to the antenna, and which is broadcast. Right, so what is the source there? The source is our voice, which drives something, and then it is amplified and put up the antenna. Now the source of gravitational waves are massive objects, except that the gravitational waves that you and I can produce will be utterly negligible. So we depend upon very massive, very compact objects like neutron stars. And if there are two neutron stars going around each other, then they will produce gravitational waves, especially and when they produce the gravitational waves, they lose energy, therefore they spiral together, and as they spiral they produce more and more waves. Right, so then you get a burst of gravitational waves from them. Now these gravitational waves, detecting them is very difficult, and you do that by building what is called a very vast interferometer. Okay, this interferometer, the one which I used called there is an experiment called LIGO, Laser Interferometric Gravitational Wave Observatory. So LIGO is located in the USA. There are two LIGO detectors, and over the last 6 months people have started deploying what are known as advanced LIGO detectors. Okay, so which are very much more sensitive than the original ones, and these act in tandem together. So now the idea is to build a third LIGO detector in India, and it will be a collaboration between the American and Indian groups. The American group has given the immensely sensitive LIGO detector, and it will be the job of Indian astronomers and engineers and physicists to actually build a very large vacuum setup. So the setup is that there are two arms which are 4 kilometers long, and then they are held at very high vacuum. Inside them is one of the most powerful lasers in the world, and these lasers are reflected by mirrors, and then interference pattern is produced. Okay. So when a gravitational wave passes by, it changes the pattern, which allows us to detect it. All of this sounds very familiar because it is what is known as the Michelson interferometer, except that the signal here is incredibly weak, and the length change that the signal produces is an extremely small fraction of the size of an elementary particle like the proton. Okay, so which means that you cannot use normal technology, and people have been trying for very hard, and everyone believes that now we are on the verge of success.
Why they wish to have the LIGO in India rather than in putting in another place of the world? Because they have already.
One thing, the most important reason is that India is very far away. So you see that the two detectors in the USA, there is one which is located in Washington State in the northeast of the US, northwest of the US, whereas the other one is located in Louisiana in the south, and they are located far away because the greater the distance, the more sensitive it will be to the direction from which gravitational waves are coming. So if you follow the same logic and you put a telescope in India, a gravitational wave detector in India, then you will get a very long baseline. Now you could put in other countries, but there are two important requirements here. One requirement is that the country must itself be technologically advanced enough in this subject, right, so that they can build part of the detector, part of the installation, the whole of the installation, and then they can also they have the technology to actually operate it. Whereas there is one requirement. The other requirement is that this is a mega project. It needs a lot of money, and it's very important that the government takes into cognizance the importance of it and approves the project and gives you funding. And because all these circumstances seem to be available in India, therefore they LIGO India.
Okay. With these mega projects, how the students can get into astronomy and astrophysics, or the long term, how beneficial will it be for those people?
Again, you are touching a very important point here, because it is going to take more than 10 years to build any one of these big things, and then they are going to be operated over 20 years. So which means that people who will use them are just about being born. Okay, one. And second, the last people to use it are just being born.
Yeah.
The first people to use it will be those who are now 20 years old and 25 years old, and it is those people that we have got to train and we have got to educate to use them. Now you see, the point is that if you offer a student to work on something which has been there for a long time, and now we all have telescopes, so you have a telescope, we have a telescope. When you have these kind of things, students do come because they are attracted. But just instead of asking them to work on your small telescope, let us suppose that you say, do you want to work on the world's biggest telescope? I mean, that has got a completely different kind of attraction. Okay, because first of all, the challenge of working with something which is the biggest in the world, and secondly, the interesting investigation that you will make.
Yeah.
So that is why there is a concept of astronomy for development, meaning that I am not talking about the development of astronomy, I am talking about astronomy being used as a tool for development. Okay, so how does that come about? Because making big telescopes involves new technology. Many people get trained in it. Young students will use it, and therefore there is overall economic development and scientific development of the country.
Yeah.
So therefore it is going to be our endeavor to teach young people, to bring them into this fold and to encourage them to use these big telescopes.
Okay. So it was a wonderful talking to you, Professor Kembavi. Let me thank you for your valuable time and your talk here.
It's been a great pleasure for me. Thank you very much.
Eastern Art. Part 1. Chinese Art. Far East is a term often used for East Asia and Southeast Asia combined. The history of Far Eastern art includes while the earliest non-paintings in East Asia were painted on the walls of tombs during the last 2 millennia, a variety of distinctive portable formats for viewing and storing paintings and calligraphy were developed and are common with certain nonsense to all 3 countries of China, Korea and Japan. In this session, we will go for an overview of the art history of these 3 regions, starting with Chinese art. Art of China. The Chinese culture is one of the world's oldest known culture and is also considered to be one that is full of mystery and many complex elements. The vast area that the country of China expands over has a great amount of regional diversity with regards to the customs and traditions that are prevalent. Early Stone Age art in China dates back to 10,000 BC, mostly consisting of simple pottery and sculptures. After this early period, Chinese art, like Chinese history, is typically classified by the succession of ruling dynasties of Chinese emperors, most of which lasted several hundred years. In Chinese art, the stabilizing effect of tradition was respected, but so was individual creativity. How to build a style into a personal instrument of expression, how to reach a balance between objective description and subjective comment, how to endue the formal materials of painting with a human content so that its meaning need not to be bound
to the literal or symbolic meaning of its subject matter were some of the chief concerns of the Chinese painter. Early forms of art in China are found in the Neolithic Yangshu culture, which dates back to the 6th millennium BC. The early ceramics were unpainted and most often code-marked. The first decorations were fish and human faces, but these eventually evolved into symmetrical geometric abstract designs, some painted. But the most distinctive feature of Yangshu culture was the extensive use of painted pottery, especially human facial, animal and geometric designs. The Bronze Age in China began with Xia dynasty. In the following Shang dynasty, more elaborate objects including many ritual vessels were crafted. The Shang are remembered for their bronze casting, noted for its clarity of detail. Shang bronze smiths usually worked in foundries outside the cities to make ritual vessels and sometimes weapons and chariot fittings as well. Some forms of bronze vessels such as the ku and jiu can be very graceful, but the most powerful pieces are the ding, sometimes described as having an air of ferocious majesty. It is typical of the developed Shang style that all available space is decorated, most often with stylized forms of real and imaginary animals. By the varying state period, that is, a period in ancient China following the spring and autumn period and concluding with the victory of the state in Qin in 221 BC, creating a unified China under the Qin dynasty. Bronze vessels had become objects of aesthetic enjoyment. Some were decorated with social scenes, such as from a banquet or hunt, while others displayed abstract patterns inlaid with gold, silver, or precious and semi-precious stones. Shang bronzes became appreciated as works of art from the Song dynasty when they were collected and prized not only for their shape and design but also for the various green, blue-green and even reddish patinas created by chemical action as they lay buried in the ground. The terracotta army inside the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor consists of more than 7,000 life-size tomb terracotta figures of warriors and horses buried with the self-proclaimed first emperor of Qin, that is Qin Shi Huang, in 210 to 209 BC. The figures were painted before being placed into the vault. After the civil war that followed the death of Qin Shi Huang, China was reunited under the rule of the Han dynasty, which is divided into two major periods. The western or former Han during 206 BC to 9 AD and the eastern or later Han during 25 to 220 AD. The Han dynasty was known for jade burial suits. One of the earliest known depictions of a landscape in Chinese art comes from a pair of hollow tile door panels from a western Han dynasty tomb near Zhengzhou, dated 60 BC. A scene of continuous depth recession is conveyed by the zigzag of lines representing roads and garden walls, giving the impression that one is looking down from the top of a hill. This artistic landscape scene was made by the repeated impression of standard stamps on the clay while it was still soft and not yet fired. However, the oldest known landscape art scene tradition in the classical sense of painting is a work by Zhang Ziqin of the Zhou dynasty during 581 to 618. Buddhism arrived in China around the 1st century AD, and through to the 8th century it became very active and creative in the development of Buddhist art, particularly in the area of statuary. Receiving this distant religion, China soon incorporated strong Chinese traits in its artistic expression. In the 5th to 6th century, the northern dynasties, rather removed from the original sources of inspiration, tended to develop more symbolic and abstract modes of representation with schematic lines. In ancient China, Painting and calligraphy were the most highly appreciated arts in court circles and were produced almost exclusively by amateurs, aristocrats and scholar officials. Calligraphy was thought to be the highest and purest form of painting. Writing as well as painting was done on silk, but after the invention of paper in the 1st century, silk was gradually replaced by it. Original writings by famous calligraphers have been greatly valued throughout and Chinese history and are mounted on scrolls and hung on walls in the same way that paintings are. The hanging landscape scrolls attributed to the Southern Sung school and are supposed to be the expression of that contemplative phase of Buddhism called Zen in Japan and Chan in China. The Chinese accept the nature in their art as they find it and seem to understand their place in the world as being part of it. They make no such sharp distinction between man and beast as the West does. It is also important to note what the Chinese were thinking of and what they meant by the 6 canons of painting laid down by He Ho. The 6 canons of Chinese brush painting. In the 5th century AD, He Ho wrote the 6 canons of painting which form the basis of all Chinese brush painting to this very day. They are circulation of the Kai, breath spirit, vital force of heaven, producing movement of life. This is in the heart of artist. Brush stroke creates structure. This is referred to as the bone structure of painting. The stronger the brushwork, the stronger the painting. Character is produced by a combination of strong and lighter strokes, thick and thin, wet and dry. According to the object, draw its form. Draw the object as you see it. In order to do this, it is very important first to understand the form of the object. This will produce a work that is not necessarily totally realistic, but as you see it, thus the more you study the object to be painted, the better you will paint it. According to the nature of the object, apply color. Black is considered a color and the range of shadings it is capable of in the hands of a master painter creates an impression of colors. If color is used, it is always true to the subject matter. Next, organize compositions with the elements in their proper place. Space is used in Chinese brush painting the same way objects are used. The space becomes an integral part of the composition. In copying, seek to pass on essence of the master's brush and methods. To the Chinese, copying is considered most essential and only when the student fully learns the time-honored techniques can he branch out into areas of individual creativity. The landscape paintings of the Southern Sung school are not limited to the large hanging scrolls. They have also produced horizontal scrolls. These scrolls can run into any length, and it is notable that in the Ming and Qing periods they grew longer and were sometimes praised for sheer length. The Tang dynasty is known for its contribution to the world of Chinese art in the form of figurine painting. The artists of that time drew inspiration from the courtly life, animals and human figures. Chinese landscape paintings that are held in great esteem today also began to flourish during the rule of the Tang dynasty, which lasted from 618 to 906. Boldly syncretic, the arts of Tang dynasty exhibit myriad international influences that were absorbed through diplomacy, conquest, trade and pilgrimage. A popular theme for Tang court painters was that of foreign ambassadors submitting tribute to the emperor. As with calligraphy, the most popular materials on which paintings were made were paper and silk. The finished works were then mounted on scrolls which could be hung or rolled up. The traditional painting was also done in albums, on walls, lacquer work and in other media. Dong Yan was an active painter in the southern Tang kingdom. He was known for both figure and landscape paintings. Zhang Ziqin was an important painter during the Zhou dynasty. By the late Tang dynasty, landscape painting had evolved into an independent genre that embodied the universal longing of cultivated men to escape their quotidian world to commune with nature. Such images might also convey specific social, philosophical or political convictions. As the Tang dynasty disintegrated, the concept of withdrawal into the natural world became a major thematic focus of poets and painters. Faced with the failure of the human order, learned men sought permanence within the natural world, retreating into the mountains to find a sanctuary from the chaos of dynastic collapse. Painting was no longer about the description of the visible world. It became a means of conveying the inner landscape of the artist's mind. By evoking select antique styles, the scholar painters could also identify themselves with the values associated with old masters. Ma Yuan was an influential Chinese landscape painter of the Song dynasty whose work, together with that of Xia Gui, formed the basis of Marxia school of painting. A characteristic feature of many of his paintings is the so-called one-corner composition, in which the actual subjects of the painting are pushed to a corner or a side, leaving the other part of the painting more or less empty. Ma Yuan's lyrical and romantic interpretation became the model for many later painters. Zhao Mengfu was a Chinese scholar, painter and calligrapher during the Mongol Yuan dynasty. His rejection of the refined, gentle brushwork of his era in favor of the cruder style of the 8th century is considered to have brought about a revolution that created the modern Chinese landscape painting. There was also the vivid and detailed works of art by Qian Xuan during 1235 to 1305, who had served the Song court and out of patriotism refused to serve the Mongols, instead turning to painting. He was also famous for reviving and reproducing a more Tang dynasty style of painting. The later Yuan dynasty is characterized by the work of the so-called four great masters. The four masters of the Yuan dynasty is a name used to collectively describe the four Chinese painters Huang Gongwang, Wu Zhen, Ni Zan and Wang Men. They worked during the Yuan period and were revered during the Ming dynasty and later periods as major exponents of the tradition of literary painting, which is concerned more with individual expression and learning than with outward representation and immediate visual appeal. Literary painting was conceived as mode through which the Confucian Junzi expressed his ethical personality. It was much less concerned with technical showiness. Literary painters specialized in plain ink paintings, sometimes with minimal color. They lay great emphasis on the idea that the style with which a painter controlled his brush conveyed the inner style of his character. Brushstrokes were seen as expressions of the spirit more than were matters of composition or skill in realistic depiction. The most notable of these was Huang Gongwang during 1269 to 1354. Whose cool and restrained landscapes were admired by contemporaries. Another of great influence was Ni Zan during 1301 to 1374, who frequently arranged his compositions with a strong and distinct foreground and background, but left the middle ground as an empty expanse. This scheme was frequently to be adopted by later Ming and Qing dynasty painters. During the Ming dynasty, when native Chinese rule was restored, court artists produced conservative images that revived the Song metaphor for the state as well-ordered imperial garden, while literary painters pursued self-expressive goals through the stylistic language of Yuan scholar artists. Zhengzhou during 1427 to 1509, the patriarch of the Wu school of painting centered in the cosmopolitan city of Zhushu, and his preeminent follower Wang Zhengming during 1470 to 1559 exemplified Ming literary ideals. Morally charged images of reclusion remain a potent political symbol during the early years of the Manchu Qing dynasty, a period in which many Ming loyalists lived in self-enforced retirement. Often lacking access to important collection of old masters, loyalist artists drew inspiration from the natural beauty of the local scenery. The individualist painters included Bada Shandran during 1626 to 1705 and Jitao 1641 to 1707. They drew more from the revolutionary ideas of transcending the tradition to achieve an original individualistic style. In this way, they were more faithfully following the way of Dong Qingchang than the orthodox school, who were his official direct followers. As the techniques of color printing were perfected, illustrated manuals on the art of painting began to be published. Jiziguang Huangzhuang, Manual of the Mustard Seed Garden, a 5-volume work first published in 1679, has been in use as a technical textbook for artists and students ever since. The Shanghai school is a very important Chinese school of traditional arts during the Qing dynasty and the whole of the 20th century. Under efforts of the masters from this school, traditional Chinese art reached another climax and continued to the present in the forms of Chinese painting. Images of nature have remained a potent source of inspiration for Chinese artists down to the present day. While the Chinese landscape has been transformed by millennia of human occupation, Chinese artistic expression has also been deeply imprinted with images of the natural world. Viewing Chinese landscape paintings, it is clear that Chinese depictions of nature are seldom mere representations of the external world. Rather, they are expressions of the mind and heart of the individual artist. Cultivated landscapes that embody the culture and cultivation of their masters. Here we conclude this session on Chinese art. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the session on Abraham Maslow's hierarchical theory of motivation. hierarchy of needs. Maslow believed that much of human behavior can be explained by the individual's tendency to seek personal goal states that make life rewarding and meaningful. In fact, motivational processes is the heart of his personality theory. Maslow in 1970 depicted the human beings as a wanting animal who rarely reaches a state of complete satisfaction except for a short time period. In Maslow's system, as one personal desire is satisfied, another will suffice to take its place. When the person satisfies this one, still another will clamor for satisfaction. It is characteristic of human life that people almost always desire something. Maslow proposed that human desires, that is motives, are innately given and are arranged in an ascending hierarchy of priority or potency. The needs are in order of their potency. 1. Basic physiological needs. 2. Safety needs. 3. Belongingness and love needs. 4. Self-esteem needs. And 5. Self-actualization needs or the need for personal fulfillment. Underlying this scheme is the assumption that low-order prepotent needs must be at least somewhat satisfied before an individual can become aware of or motivated by higher order needs. That is, as one general type of need is satisfied, another higher order need emerges and becomes operative in the person's life. A description of each need category is presented below. Physiological needs. The most basic, powerful and obvious of all human needs is the need for physical survival. Included in this group are the needs for food, drink, oxygen, activity, sleep, sex, protection from extreme temperatures and sensory stimulations. These physiological drives are directly concerned with the biological maintenance of the organism and must be gratified at some minimum level before the individual is motivated by higher order needs. The chronically hungry person will never strive to compose music, construct personological theories or build a brave new world. Safety needs. Once the physiological needs have been sufficiently satisfied, the individual becomes concerned with a new set often called the safety or security needs. The primary motivating force here is to ensure a reasonable degree of certainty, order, structure and predictability in one's environment. Maslow suggested that the safety needs are most readily observed in infants and young children because of their relative helplessness and dependence on adults. Infants, for instance, respond fearfully if they are suddenly dropped or startled by loud noises or flashing lights. Later, learning and education tend to neutralize such apparent dangers through knowledge. Example, I am not afraid of thunder and lightning because I know something about them. The urgency of safety needs is also evident when a child experiences bodily illnesses of various kinds. A child with a broken leg will temporarily experience fears, have nightmares and manifest a need for protection and reassurance not evident before the accident. Safety needs also exert an active influence beyond childhood. The preference for a job with tenure and financial protection, the establishment of savings accounts and the acquisition of insurance, example, medical, unemployment, old age, may be regarded as motivated in part by safety seeking. At least in part, religious and philosophic belief systems may also be interpreted in this fashion. Religions and philosophies help a person to organize his or her world and the people in it into a coherent and meaningful whole, thus making the person feel safe. Other expressions of the need for safety occur when individuals are confronted with real emergencies, example, war, crime waves, floods, earthquakes, riots, societal disorganizations and similar conditions. Belongingness and love needs. The belongingness and love needs constitute the third hierarchical level. These needs arise primarily when the physiological and safety needs are relatively quiescent. An individual motivated on this level longs for affectionate relationships with others, namely for a place in his or her family and or reference groups. Group membership becomes a dominant goal for the individual. Accordingly, the person will feel keenly the pangs of loneliness, social ostracism, friendlessness and rejection, especially when induced by the absence of friends, relatives, a spouse or children. Maslow rejected the Freudian notion that love and affection are derived from sublimated sexual instincts. That is, to Maslow, love is not synonymous with sex. Rather, he contended that love involves a healthy, loving relationship between two people, which includes mutual respect, admiration and trust. Maslow also stressed that love needs involve both giving and receiving love. Being loved and accepted is instrumental to healthy feelings of worth. Not being loved leads to feelings of futility, emptiness and hostility. Self-esteem needs. When one's needs for being loved and for loving others have been reasonably gratified, their motivating force diminishes, paving the way for self-esteem needs. Maslow classified these needs into two subsidiary sets, self-respect and esteem from other people. The former includes such things as desire for competence, confidence, personal strength, adequacy, achievement, independence and freedom. An individual needs to know that he or she is worthwhile, capable of mastering tasks and challenges in life. Esteem from others includes prestige, recognition, acceptance, attention, status, reputation and appreciation. In this case, individuals need to be appreciated for what they can do, that is, they must experience feelings of worth because their competence is recognized and valued by others. Again, the hierarchical nature of Maslow's view of motivation needs to be kept in mind. One seeks self-esteem only after one's love and belongingness needs are satisfied. One quickly reverts back from level 4 to level 3 if level 3 need satisfaction is suddenly jeopardized. For example, consider a person who, thinking her love needs are in good order, busies herself with becoming a recognized business tycoon. Suddenly and unexpectedly, her husband leaves her for another woman. Immediately, she casts aside all aspects of self-esteem, behaving like an utter fool in order to regain her husband, that is, satisfy her love needs. Once this relationship is restored or a suitable alternative is developed, however, she is free to reconcern herself with conquering the business world. Satisfaction of the self-esteem needs generates feelings and attitudes of self-confidence, worth, strength, capability and of being useful and necessary in the world. In contrast, the thwarting of these needs leads to feelings and attitudes of inferiority, ineptness, weakness and helplessness. These negative self-perceptions in turn may give rise to basic discouragement, a sense of futility and hopelessness in dealing with life's demands and a low evaluation of self. Self-actualization needs. Finally, if all the foregoing needs are satisfied, the need for self-actualization comes to the fore. Maslow characterized self-actualization as the desire to become everything that one is capable of becoming. The person who has achieved this highest level presses toward the full use and exploitation of his talents, capacities and potentialities. Otherwise phrased, it is a person's desire for self-improvement, namely his or her drive to become the total kind of person that one wants to become to reach the peak of his or her potential. A musician must make music, an artist must paint, a poet must write if he is to be at peace with himself. What a man can be, he must be. He must be true on his own nature. Self-actualization need not take the form of creative and artistic endeavors. A parent, an athlete, a student or teacher, or an ardent laborer may all be actualizing their potential abilities in doing well what they each can do best, since specific forms of self-actualization vary greatly from person to person. It is at this level of Maslow's need hierarchy that individual differences are greatest. Deficiency needs and growth needs. If you do not have enough of something, then it is said that you feel the need. But if you get all you need, you feel nothing at all. In other words, they cease to be motivating. He also talks about these levels in terms of homeostasis. Homeostasis is the principle by which the bodily system operates. In other words, when it gets too cold, the bodily system switches the heat on, and when it gets too hot, it switches the heat off. In the same way, human body, when it lacks a certain substance, develops a hunger for it. When it gets enough of it, then the hunger stops. Maslow simply extends this homeostatic principle to needs such as safety, belongingness, and esteem, about which do not ordinarily think of in these terms. In terms of overall development, we move through these levels a bit like stages. As newborns, our focus is on the satisfaction of the physiological needs. Soon we begin to recognize that we need to be safe. Some after that, we crave for attention and affection. A bit later, we look for self-esteem. This is in the first couple of years. Under stressful conditions or with survival is threatened, we can regress to a lower need levels. When you find that your great career falls flat, you might seek out a little attention. When your family decides to leave you, it seems that love is again all you ever wanted. If you have significant problems along your development, that is period of extreme insecurity such as hunger as a child or the loss of a family member or significant neglect or abuse, it is possible that one may fixate on that set of needs for the rest of one's life. Growth needs. Maslow has used a variety of terms to refer to the last level of needs. He has called it growth motivation in contrast to deficit motivation. They are called the being needs and self-actualization. These are needs that do not involve balance or homeostasis. They involve the continuous desire to fulfill potential, to be all that you can be. If you want to be truly self-actualizing, you need to have your lower needs taken care of, at least to a considerable extent. This makes sense, which is, if you are hungry, you are scrambling to get food. If you are unsafe, you have to be continuously on guard. If you are isolated and unloved, you have to satisfy that need. If you have a low self-esteem, you have to be defensive or compensate. When lower needs are unmet, you cannot fully devote yourself to fulfilling your potentials. Characteristics of self-actualizing persons. Maslow lists 15 noble characteristics of his self-actualizing persons. They are presented as follows. Efficient perception of reality. Perhaps the most universal characteristic of these superior people is their ability to perceive other people correctly and efficiently, to see reality as it is rather than as they wish it to be. They have a better perception of reality and more comfortable relations with it. They are less emotional and more objective about their perceptions. They do not allow their desires and hopes to distort their observations. Because of their superior perception, self-actualizing people are more readily able to detect the fake, the phony, and dishonest in others. Acceptance of self, others, and nature. The healthy person displays a sense of respect for self and others. Without feeling undue concern, he or she accepts his or her own nature in a stoic style with all its shortcomings, frailties and weaknesses. There is also freedom from overriding guilt, crippling shame and debilitating anxiety. Self-acceptance is also vividly expressed at the physiological level. Self-actualizers have hearty appetites, sleep well and enjoy their sexual lives without unnecessary inhibition. Spontaneity, simplicity, naturalness. The behavior of self-actualizing people is marked by spontaneity and simplicity, by an absence of artificiality or straining for effort. This does not imply consistently unconventional behavior. It is the person's inner life, thoughts, impulses, etc. that is unconventional, natural and spontaneous. Their unconventionality is not intended to impress others and may even be suppressed in order not to distress others, so that they may even abide by ceremonies and rituals. Thus, they may conform if it means protecting themselves or others from hurt or injustice. Problem centering. Without exception, Maslow found his subjects to be committed to some task, duty, vocation or beloved job which they regarded as important. That is, they are not ego-centered but rather oriented toward problems beyond their immediate needs, problems to which they are dedicated in the sense of a mission in life. In this sense, they live to work rather than work to live. Their work is subjectively experienced as defining characteristic of themselves. Self-actualizers are also deeply concerned with philosophic and ethical issues. Accordingly, they live and work within the widest frame of reference, tending to devote themselves to non-personal missions or tasks. Detachment, need for privacy. This kind of individual prefers solitude and privacy and even seeks it to a greater extent than the average person. In social encounters, he or she is often viewed by normal people as being aloof, reserved, snobbish and cold. This is because self-actualizers do not need other people in the usual sense of friendship. They rely completely upon their inner resources and remain unruffled by that which produces turmoil in others. Autonomy, independence of culture and environment. As prior characteristics would suggest, self-actualizing people are not dependent for their main satisfaction on the physical and social environment. Rather, they rely on their own potentialities and latent resources for growth and development. For example, truly self-actualizing college students do not really need the right academic atmosphere on campus to learn. They can learn anywhere they want because they have themselves. Healthy people also have a high degree of self-direction and free will. Continued freshness of appreciation. Maslow discovered that healthy, mature and adults exhibit a capacity to appreciate even the most ordinary events in their lives with a sense of newness, awe, pleasure and even ecstasy. They seldom become bored with life experiences. Peak of mystic experiences. Maslow observed that self-actualizing individuals commonly had what he called peak experiences, also termed oceanic feeling. This term referred to moments of intense excitement and high tension as well as to those of relaxation, peacefulness, blissfulness and stillness. Representing the most ecstatic moments of life, such occurrences usually come from love and sexual climax, burst of creativity, insight and discovery and fusion with nature. These people can turn on without artificial stimulants. Just being alive turns them on. Social interests. Even though self-actualizers are sometimes troubled, saddened and even enraged by the shortcomings of the human race, they experience a deep feeling of kinship with humanity. Consequently, they have a genuine desire to help improve the lot of their fellows. This nurturing attitude is evidenced by a feeling of compassion, sympathy and affection for all humanity. Interpersonal relations. Self-actualizing people tend to form deeper and closer personal relationships than those of the average adult. Similarly, those with whom they associate are likely to be healthier and closer to self-actualized